Josh Dean is back for a part two, speaking about, politics and all the latest affairs. And I welcome Josh back to the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a year since we spoke, and there's been a lot that you've been doing in the community, and there's a lot that's been happening, in global affairs as well. But let's start off with the lighter question. What is your day-to-day life like on a Wednesday when it's PMQs?
Well, this week I got to ask a PMQ, which was nice. Meant that it was a slightly different Wednesday to usual. So on Wednesday, I asked the Prime Minister to back my campaign for more investment in SEND provision in Hertford and Stortford. Special educational needs and disabilities provision is a hugely important issue to our residents. Really important to me as well. My mum is a Senko. I have ADHD. And so really keen to be pushing for the investment that I think we need in our community to provide those services. So this week, that meant preparing for PMQs, sort of trying to rehearse and remember my question. And then from then you go on to, meetings, debates, asking other questions of ministers, whatever it may be for the rest of the day. On a normal week, I don't have a PMQ myself. It's sometimes a challenge to get picked because it is a ballot. But I will be in PMQs nonetheless each week. It's a big part of the week.
And it must be quite the privilege to ask the Prime Minister a question. Were you nervous? Because I suppose that forgetting a question may come down to that.
I was quite nervous. I think, when you become an MP, you do get nervous the first time you ever speak. And I still get the nerves a little bit sometimes. I think that's not the worst thing. It sort of helps to drive me forward. But I got very nervous for my PMQ this week, and I was very nervous for my first PMQ last year. Because the chamber is so busy, it's it's the thing that's going to get watched the most that week by the public in Parliament. So I do get a little bit nervous, but I don't think that's the worst thing.
No, and I completely agree. I think it's because you care so much about you and your job. So the questions that I was asking in the local community, we've had over, I was very surprised. I've got 240 replies over that now. So let's split it up. So the first thing we're going to speak about is local infrastructure, transport and environment. And the first question is about Stortford, Bishop Stortford. And it's become a very difficult place to navigate. And with more housing planned, what would you do to improve the road capacity and the traffic flow?
Yeah, that's a really, really good topic to start on. So what I would say to start with is we've seen a lot of housing growth in, we're a home county seat. We've seen a lot of housing growth across the piece, but particularly in Bishop Stortford. That does have an impact on infrastructure, on the community. My sort of approach and my belief is, what we need is the right kind of housing, firstly. So we're getting homes that are affordable for local people, getting those starter homes in for young families, getting those single person properties in, and working to make sure that the infrastructure keeps pace with that. And also there's an important point as well about, social housing, which the government has put, I think, about £39 billion into over the course of the spending review period. So on the infrastructure point in particular, it is really important that we're improving that. I know that we see a lot of challenges around potholes. I know that because there was one for quite a long time on the same street as my office in Stortford. The government's put record funding into, road improvement, tackling potholes and improving that infrastructure across the country. I joined with colleagues in Herts to write to the County Council after the government released their red, amber, green ratings because Hertfordshire was an amber council. Basically setting out the additional support the government's putting in place to help manage that and manage that process of improving the roads. But I'm conscious of the point around infrastructure in particular, and that's why one of the things that I've been looking at recently is around the proposed doctor surgery at Stortford Fields. That's been caught up for a long time, so I'm looking at an issue there because I know it's been caught up in planning and so on. I know that earlier last year, the government put money towards Church Street surgery in Bishop Stortford so that they could expand. That work actually started very recently, which I was really pleased about. So making sure that we get that infrastructure in, I think, is really important. And one of the things that I raise with colleagues in government and also work with local stakeholders on.
We've got 10 categories to get through, but there's another question that I wanted to ask, which is maybe a personal one for me as well. So, in terms of the Arriva buses that we see across the constituency, they're often late, delayed, and well, it's very frustrating sometimes to get even down the road. Now, I know that the cap's been introduced, so you can go 2 stops for £3, or you can go 20 stops for £3.
Mm.
But what are you going to do, or can you do anything to make sure that the buses are arriving more frequently
Well,
and on time? Can I say as well?
yeah, that's another key one, isn't it? You're absolutely right. There is a cap in place. That's really important because it makes a difference for people in our communities, particularly in semi-rural communities like ours. The government is looking to lift the ban on municipal ownership of bus services, essentially allowing local authorities to run their own bus services, so that bus decisions about those bus services are made closer to local people by people who represent them, still run by an operator, but run for the people that rely on them, not for profit. That's going forward under the bus services bill. I joined with colleagues last year again to write to the county council to set out what the government was doing and to understand what their plans might be. And I've had positive conversations with colleagues about how we might push for that, because I think making sure that we get that kind of franchising in our communities will make that difference, so that buses are run closer to the people that rely on them, not just for profit. There has been an announcement around a sort of pilot, a franchise pilot, funding going into the local authority for that. And part of that pilot, it could be run in East Herts. And I'm really keen to make sure that that is the case, because I think that's the way forward on bus services, making sure they run for local people, not just for profit for people who run companies.
Last year, I asked you about train fares. Now, I know that the government has frozen train fares, but there's a lot of people in the constituency that head into London, so they're using TfL services. Now, I know you're not Sadiq Khan, and I know you're not part of the TfL, so it's hard for you to have so much of a say in it. But for a family like mine, my parents are paying £150 a week minimum to be able to send us to college in London. And obviously there has been a freeze in it, but are we ever going to see the price come down, or is it just going to be frozen for maybe years?
Well, I think, look, firstly, the point around the rail fare freeze, that's the first time rail fares have been frozen in 30 years. So it would have gone up at the start of this month in March, as they had done every year for 30 years. So I think freezing them is a really important first step, and I really welcome that. Absolutely, there is more to do. That's why we're taking our railways back into public ownership. That's also why we are bringing in Great British Railways, to make sure that we are running our similar to the discussion about bus services, actually making sure that we are running our trains for the people that rely on them, not for shareholders at the top. And I think longer term, there's a point around, how do we start to ease that cost of living burden? I think that this feeds very much into that, and we can talk, I'm sure, about some of the work the government's doing there as well. But this is a really important first step. No government has frozen those fares at any point in the last 30 years, so I really welcome the fact the government has done that. And I know that we've just seen contactless ticketing come to Bishop Stortford and Sawbridgeworth after a frustrating delay, but that will help to make travel, more convenient, simpler, and easier for people in our constituency as well, which I think is great news.
When you actually prepare for an interview, I have all these questions to ask, but then I get questions that you're telling me that I've got to make off that. So, firstly, congratulations, by the way, on the lift saga at Hertford North. I know that's taken quite some time, and you've been very good on that. So, congratulations on that. We're now going to move on to healthcare. Now, I know that part of my survey actually, 60% of people found it difficult or very difficult to get appointments. What's your plan to improve the access to GPs and also for dentists as well?
So we talked earlier a little bit about the investment in Church Street surgery, for example, and that came as part of the government's investment to really invest in the bricks and mortar that we need to improve our GP provision. So that work at Church Street started, I think, earlier last month. I think that's fantastic, because it means that we can expand and improve that provision. Also, why I'm looking at this issue at Stortford Fields that has persisted for a number of years. And as an MP, I'm always conscious not to raise expectations too much. It's a really tricky issue, and I'm just sort of speaking to stakeholders at the moment. But it's those kind of improvements that I'm really keen to try and drive. We see record investment in our NHS under this Labour government. When we came into government, the NHS wasn't just on its knees; it was flat on its face. We know that because we can't get appointments, because we haven't been able to get the care that we need. And so improving that has got to be one of this government's most important priorities, not just getting it back on its feet, but getting it ready for the future as well. So that's why we're talking a lot more about, shifting more care into the community, more preventative support to alleviate pressure at the emergency end. I'm very keen to make sure that when we see that investment is coming into communities like ours. So looking at those issues around doctor surgeries in particular, on the point around dentists, there is a real challenge. You talk of dental deserts, for example. The government is doing more around that, but I'm keen to push to make sure that we address that in our community. I had, for example, an extremely painful dental issue recently, and like many of our residents, I'm not on the NHS anymore, unfortunately. So had to, go elsewhere, which is a challenge. One of the things I'd say on these points and all the points that we'll talk about, I'm sure, is that I'm always keen to press government ministers, not just on the issues themselves, but on the impact in our community and what it means for local residents, and really highlight the experiences of people in our community. So really do encourage those people that have written in and have got these experiences to get in touch and share them, because I'm really keen to make sure that ministers hear them.
The last time I saw you, Josh, I think was in July, and we would discuss the National Youth Strategy.
Yep.
And maybe I helped, maybe I didn't. But what have you been doing since then to develop on that? And I know that intertwines with the whole work of youth clubs. Obviously, the word youth is a big emphasis that you have.
It was a fantastic session. The sort of roundtable that we did on the National Youth Strategy. Really pleased to see that launched at the end of last year, with £500 million of backing as well. I think, I've spoken before about my experience leaving school early, being supported by youth workers. I would not be an MP without that sort of support, without that experience. So making sure we have those kinds of services for people in our community, young people in our community, is really, really important for me. So keen to make the case to see that investment come to our community as that sort of money comes forward later this year. And also to make sure that I'm working closely with local youth groups, local young people, to make sure that their voices are heard. I sort of think, one of the big challenges in an area like ours is, we are semi-rural. So when we talk about opportunities for young people, it's as much about having spaces for young people, having youth services, having the opportunities they want to connect with, as it is about making sure they can actually get to them. And that's why the point around improving public transport is so important, I think. But one thing I would say as well is that coming out of that, there's, a conversation at the moment around the number of young people not in employment, educational training. And I think there's a real link there between youth workers and bridging those young people into the right support so that they can get into work and fulfilling work as well. So that was one of my other Prime Minister's questions at the end of last year, and a piece of work that I'm keen to drive forward, because I think that there's a real opportunity to sort of fill that missing link, I think, get those young people the support they need to get them into work, and allow them to thrive.
Obviously, as part of this survey, the cost of living was 100% brought up.
Absolutely.
Now, 75% of respondents said that their situation is worse since the new government in 2024. Now, you're going to tell me that the government's doing loads of things to be able to do things to be able to make things more affordable. What are you doing? What's the most important thing at the top of the list that you are doing that will really see an impact in homes like mine?
Well, so we talked earlier about the freeze on rail fares, for example. We're also freezing GP prescription charges. Beyond that, one of the key measures that we've been talking about, and rightly talking a lot about, are plans, are the work that we've done to introduce 30 hours of free childcare. That is important, not just to alleviate the cost burden on families, but also to make sure that parents in those families are able to get to work at a good time, because they can rely on that childcare. We're opening thousands more free breakfast clubs across the country as part of our commitment to open them in every primary school. That includes here in Hertford and Stortford. We've got funding for a free primary school breakfast club at one of our local breakfast clubs, at one of our local schools, which I think is fantastic news. That again is about alleviating that sort of cost burden on parents and providing that sort of additional childcare for them. And I think one of the key things is around living standards. improving people's living standards, trying to get them that space to breathe, really, because we know the cost of living crisis has gone on for a number of years. People are really feeling the challenge. So that's why we are, for example, lifting the two-child benefit cap. I'm a strong supporter of that because it means that just over 1,000 children in Hertford and Stortford will see their living standards go up. We have extended the free school meals program. That's the largest expansion that we've seen in a number of years. So that means that if a child has a parent who is on universal credit, they will get access to free school meals. And I think that was almost 3,000 children, young people in Hertford and Stortford will get access to a good, healthy free school meal as a result. And it's those kinds of things to alleviate the pressure, alleviate the burden, but also to make sure that families and children, young people are getting a good start in life. But what I would say is I completely recognise that people are still feeling the pinch, absolutely, because firstly, the international picture is so challenging. Whether it be the instability coming from conflict around the world, whether that be in Ukraine, whether that be in the Middle East, whether it be tariffs coming from the American president. And we inherited a really difficult economic situation, but people are right to be restless for change. People are right to be restless for things to improve. And that's why a big part of my job every day is pressing for the government to do more, and particularly for people here in Hertford and Stortford. So welcome those measures that we have put in already. Know that there's more to do. And, I'm not complacent in any way. I absolutely recognise that for me, it's about pressing for improvements for residents in Hertford and Stortford, and that's what I'm focused on.
People around me are heading off to university within the next few months, and a lot of them have been put off, maybe even myself, at the fact that how expensive it is to go to university.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the loans that people are coming out with are extortionate. What are you doing? And I'm presuming that you would like to see university be free, and I don't think that's actually quite possible, but could the government maybe do some sorts of, what do you think the government could do in terms of bringing down that burden for people, for young people?
Well, there's a big conversation at the moment around student loans, and rightly so, particularly those who are on Plan 2 student loans who have left university post 2012. And I was on a Plan 2 student loan when I went to university. And I do think we really need to address this, because I think for so many of those, young people in their 20s, 30s who were on a Plan 2 loan, have graduated, when I speak to some of my friends, they're in more debt than when they actually started, which doesn't feel fair. And I think young people are feeling that squeeze in particular when we talk about the cost of living. This compounds those pressures, because if you are a young person trying to get a start in life, trying to get your own home, or if you're, moving out and renting, if you're trying to pay into your pension pot for the future, this puts the squeeze on even more, makes it harder for you. So I do think we need to address that. I've been supportive of the proposals from the Good Growth Foundation because I think those are fair and progressive. And what comes out of this, what the solution has got to be a progressive one. If you look, for example, at what's being proposed by the Conservatives, talking about scrapping some university courses, what they call useless courses, I passionately disagree with, because I want young people to be able to go to university and study whatever they want to because they have a love of learning. So it has to be a progressive solution. I don't support any proposals around scrapping courses. That's why I support what the Good Growth Foundation's been talking about. And I think, the frustration for me is you see the Conservatives now talking about this. They're wrapping up their classic thing around scrapping certain courses. And also it's a bit like a mugger coming back to you and asking if you want your wallet back, having lifted the cash out of it, because they introduced this in the coalition government. They introduced these Plan 2 loans. So I think, this government, it needs to focus on a progressive solution to this. That's what I've been speaking about. And I know other colleagues have as well. And that's certainly what I want to see to help to alleviate that sort of pressure and that that challenge around what makes young people want to or not want to go to university.
Someone actually suggested on this forum that young people. So they said, I believe that that my child should not be in formal education until the age of 7. Maybe 7's a bit of a stretch, but I can understand sort of where they're coming from. I believe hearing from people in the past that now they're learning proper things that you'd learn in year 4 when I was younger. They're now learning in reception or even in year 1. And then moving on to secondary schools, 88% of people said that we should teach them more practical skills like how to cook and budgeting and things like that. Now, I'm presuming you're going to agree with that, being a young person, a young MP yourself. Are you going to push the government for less exams and more practical learning?
Well, the government's just responding to the recommendations of the Curriculum Assessment Review. And the Curriculum Assessment Review was commissioned when we came into government to look at, exactly as it says on the tin, the curriculum and how we assess children and young people in school. And I did a lot of work last year pushing on the assessment end of that because I was working with a charity called Young Minds, fantastic charity, who ran a campaign called Missing the Mark. And it was really looking at the well-being impact of exams, particularly on SATs at the primary level. And the statistics on this are really staggering. You know, the number of 10, 11-year-olds doing their SATs who say that it's the first time in their life they question their abilities or felt bad about themselves because of SATs. And the impact of, you know, high pressure, high stakes exams in a very short period of time when you do your GCSEs and A levels. So I actually led a debate on this in Parliament last year. The government, the curriculum assessment review, has now been published. And while it doesn't go as far as I would like it to, which is in terms of, bringing down the number of exams, looking at other methods of assessment, it does look at alleviating, firstly, the burden of content, the weight of content on some courses. I was speaking to one of the exam boards who were talking about how, for example, in maths, children are sitting 3 papers, for example, but they know that one paper 1, can predict within, I think, 90 to 95% accuracy what their final grade will be. And yet we make them sit these additional exams again and again. But also, the government's looking at bringing down the number of hours in terms of exams, which I think is a good step in the right direction. On the point around what children are learning, I was really, really pleased to see what came out of the curriculum side of the Curriculum Assessment Review, because I think it really focuses on social justice. It focuses on critical skills, media literacy, financial education. I'm keen to make sure that as part of that, we recognise that critical skills are also mental well-being and resilience, that I think young people will really benefit from having in the curriculum. And that's one of the things that I talked about at the time that it was announced. So there is work being done in government to improve that. And I'm keen to make sure that that is the case, because I remember leaving school and sort of feeling that I wished I had learned more sort of practical knowledge that I need for life. And we want young people to leave school ready for work and life. We need a curriculum that backs that up.
As a young person, I can assure you that I absolutely hate exams. I mean, I sat in those exams and I just couldn't stand them. But it makes sense that we really should be thinking about more practical life skills, as you touched upon there. Immigration is a huge part of the way people are going to be voting in the May elections. For some reason, people think that Farage will get in charge by voting him in May. But by this whole thing of immigration, people in the constituency have been saying that they want stronger borders and they want reforms to the benefit system as well. How do you respond to the concerns about the fairness for taxpayers and where their money is actually going?
My sort of basis for this discussion around immigration is, well, firstly, I'm the product of immigration as well. So my grandfather on my dad's side, and I think my great-grandfather on my mother's side. And so I'm really conscious of the contribution that people who come to our country and want to become a part of our society can make. I do recognise, though, that we need a fair but firm system of immigration, because it's a precious thing. It is a precious thing, and that's why it has to be fairly and properly managed. The government is looking at a series of changes around immigration. I think the consultation on what they're calling earned settlement has just closed. I'm keen to make sure that local people's voices are heard in it. If you take the flip side of this, there are changes that might affect people in our community already living here. That's why I held a public meeting with people from the Hong Kong community in Bishop Stortford on the BNO visa route to make sure their voices were heard as part of that, and wrote to the Minister out the back of that meeting as well. But I do really recognise that we have to make sure that our system our immigration system is a fair one. I think fairness is really important. I think we're a compassionate country. I think we're a fair country, but it does have to be properly managed because it is precious, and that's why we have to make sure that we protect it.
Last time I spoke to you, you were obviously praised for becoming the first Labour MP in the constituency ever. Now, a lot of the predictions, I know the election could be, well, Keir Starmer could call it next month, or we could call it whenever, but there has been a lot of talk about this constituency not being Labour post the next election. It could go to the Conservatives, it could go to Reform, is what it's looking likely to be. Based on that, are you always going to be in Hertford and Stortford, or would you ever consider moving to a safer seat in London, for example, where Labour has always been the top dog?
No, I wouldn't. Look, when the opportunity came up to apply to be a candidate for the Labour Party, I applied for one seat, Hertford and Stortford. If I hadn't been picked to stand in Hertford and Stortford, I would not have stood in the general election. I am proud to be a Labour MP, but I am far, far prouder to be Hertford and Stortford's MP because this community is my home. It's given me so much. I still live here today, and I would not want to stand anywhere else or be the MP for anywhere else. And, look, the election is a few years away. A lot can happen in that time. We have to make sure that we're delivering for people and delivering for people in a way that they feel, they don't just read about in the papers, but they feel makes a material difference in their lives. And for me, it's about making sure that people know they have an active local MP who's working to improve things in our community. That's not what I believe we had in my predecessor. I've opened my shop front office here in Hertford and Stortford. I'm working on some of those projects that we discussed earlier, making sure that we're doing regular surgeries across the community. And I'm keen to make sure that people know come the next election that they feel they made the right choice with me and that they will stick with it again. And that's what I'm focused on, delivering for local people.
Have you been thinking much about the next election for yourself, or not really?
Always in the back of my head. And I think that's part of politics, isn't it? You do have sort of a thing in the back of your head about the next election. But I also think if I spend every day worrying or thinking about the next election, that's time I'm not spent thinking about what I'm doing right now for residents. And so obviously I have one sort of eye on the election, but I'm also, my primary focus is the work I'm doing now to deliver for local residents and making sure that work does deliver for local residents, because my worry is always that sometimes politicians end up spending, too much time thinking about the next election and maybe not enough about what's in front of them. And I really want to make sure that residents have got someone focused on the issues that matter to them here and now.
There's a lot of people in the constituency who have eyes on Ukraine, have eyes now on Iran and the Middle East. And when obviously the Labour Party came in, they continued supporting Ukraine like the previous government did, which I think is the right decision to make. A lot of people haven't really been keeping up to date in what's going on in Ukraine, and we're seeing a lot of the weapons that Iranian made being used against Ukraine, and now we're seeing them be used against America, in Iran. You have been quite vocal on supporting Ukrainians, and I know there are some in Hertford and Stortford.
Yeah.
How do you see Britain's international role with the Iranian people?
Well, I think firstly on the point around Ukraine, you make a really important point, which is that it's a cross-party support, and our support across Parliament has always been ironclad for people in Ukraine. I've met people in our community who have found safety here from the war in Ukraine, and I'm really privileged to have had the opportunity to speak to them and feel really, really strongly around making sure that we continue that support. You ask a really important question around what's happening in Iran, and it is a really difficult, really sensitive issue. So I want to go through it slowly. We know that for too long there's been a real oppression in Iran. The thousands of people that were killed in protests just in recent weeks is staggering. And so my sort of thinking is around support for the for the Iranian people and for their freedom. Obviously, the American president and other allies have made a decision around engaging in Iran. I think what's really important is that we have deployed our military, our diplomatic strength to make sure that people from the United Kingdom in the region are kept safe. I do think the government has made the right decision in not joining the initial engagement, but making sure that we are involved for defensive purposes, because there are people out there in the UAE, in the surrounding region, from the UK, who are stuck there in some cases, who are worried, and who are contacting my office, for example, for support in getting back. So making sure that we're using our military and our diplomatic strength in the right way to protect people, I think is the right approach. And my hope is that we will see, that sort of freedom restored for people.
There's still quite a lot more to get through, but I wanted to ask about boots on the ground in Ukraine.
Mm.
Now, there was talk about this, and it sort of died out a tiny bit, but would we ever see British troops on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, there's very high level conversations that go on about these kinds of things, slightly above myself on the back benches. But I think we have led that coalition of the willing to try and bring an end to this horrific invasion by Russia. We have said, obviously, that we would commit to security guarantees for the Ukrainian people once a peace settlement is reached. I think that's really, really important. Because Ukraine's security is also the West's security. We need to make sure that we are safeguarding not just our allies in Ukraine, but ensuring that we have strong defensive capability for the rest of Europe and for ourselves. That's why I think it's really important that we're, looking at increasing defence spending as fast as possible. We can see projects going ahead across the country to not just bolster our defensive capability, but also to bring good jobs to local communities as well. So while I'm always keen to engage with the government and debate in Parliament around next steps, I think the primary challenge at the moment is seeking to make sure that Russia is at the table, engaging with the process, ending the invasion, and ensuring that we can work with our Ukrainian allies to guarantee their security.
Actually, I'm doing a project about that right now, and it's about leadership and what it is going on in the world, but especially in Ukraine in the early days of the war. So again, I completely agree with what you've said there. In recent times, and again, it sort of died out here, but people are very proud to be British and English, and we've seen a lot of flags being put up in Ware and Hertford and places around the constituency. Firstly, do you agree with the flags going up? And secondly, would you put them up yourself, or not so much?
Well, look, I think firstly, I'm proud of our flag. I am proud of our flag. I'm proud of what it means or what it should mean. And to me, the Union Jack and the St George flag are about, sporting excellence. They're about, music competitions around the world. They're about, for me, it's a flag that if you live here in the UK, if you call it your home, it should be your flag. It should be unifying and it should bring people together. I have a Union Jack in my office, for example. I'm proud of it. With the flags that have gone up in recent months, I feel, and I know residents feel, and I've had a number of residents speak to me about it because they were concerned about it. I feel that those flags have not been used for that unifying purpose. That in some cases, they're being used to divide communities, and that's not what our flag stands for. It's not what it should stand for. And I utterly reject anyone who would seek to wrap a politics of division in our national flag, because that flag is for everyone. It's for all of us, not for a select few. So I'm really live to concerns that people have raised around these flags going up, and I'm very live to the fact that some people will agree with what I've said and some people won't. But what is important is that far and above the division and the noise of politics, our flag should be something to be proud of. They should be something that bring people together. That's what we should be using our flags for. And I think when people come to me with real worry and in some cases fear, we as politicians have to acknowledge that and challenge that. And that's what I would do all day long to anyone, to challenge anyone who seeks to use our flags in a divisive way.
And backing onto your point, I suppose that the World Cup's coming up in a few months, and the flag should be out for that. And of course, hopefully, we can bring it home and add on to the sporting success that you mentioned there. Fanshawe Swimming Pool, you campaigned pretty profoundly for it to be reopened to the public, and I was pretty disappointed actually to see the pool close in the first place and to lose its funding through the government. Now, the pool is going to be reopening, as far as I'm aware, but it is going to be used for Chauncey School, but it's just going to be used for that purpose. Are you pretty disappointed to find out that it will not be used for the public use?
Well, look, I think firstly what I'd say is it was a really difficult situation, a really challenging one, and certainly a challenging one to deal with very early days under the new government as a new MP. Um, that funding had been in place for a number of years, and under the previous government, my understanding was that the previous Conservative government had allowed for one more year of funding to give local stakeholders time to find other arrangements, and those arrangements, unfortunately, weren't able to be made. I did get involved. I wrote to the minister. I met with the minister a number of times. Unfortunately, it was not something that we could take forward, and that was really disappointing. And I know why residents were disappointed by that. But again, it's that inheritance of previous decisions that were made, and so it is challenging. I know that there's a community campaign around Fanshawe, and I really support what community campaigners are doing. Obviously, certain decisions will be made around Chauncey School, and it's not for me to comment on those decisions. What I would say is that I support what's being done by local campaigners, and I hope that a resolution can be found in the long term.
As part of the survey, a few people actually did a bit more investigating rather than just on the surface level. And they've said to me that in the next few weeks, in April 2026, your salary is set to rise by 5% to £98,000, £599, sorry. And with a target of £110,000 by the end of the Parliament. Now, many people in Hertford and also the surrounding areas are probably not on that salary. They're probably on lower, if not much lower. Now, the reason behind that was because is because of increased casework and abuse that MPs get, which I am completely understandable of. However, there are people in the constituency, as I said, that are not on that money. So do you sort of feel a bit more disconnected to them? And how would you look them in the eye and justify this 5% increase?
Well, what I would say is I don't feel disconnected from people because this is my community, this is my home, and I wanted to be RMP so that I could make a difference for those people and work to support them, whether it be with casework or local issues. Now, these decisions are not made by MPs; they're not made by Parliament. They're made by IPSA, the independent organisation. They consult with experts and so on, around not just in the UK but around the world, comparing salaries in other legislatures. Part of this is also making sure that MP staff get a pay increase as well, and I want to make sure that that's in line with the work that they do too. Because exactly as you say, increased abuse, increased casework, and that's not just me, that's my wider team. These decisions are made independently. I do completely appreciate that the point that you make, it is tied up in those, in those decisions by IPSA. It's independent, not a decision made by MPs, and also comes alongside, changes to, the sort of what they call business costs, so to support MPs employing staff to have their offices, and also pay increase for staff members too. And so, I'm always happy to have the conversation with people, always happy to have that conversation, but it doesn't make me feel disconnected. What I would say, though, is it puts impetus on us to make sure we are tackling that cost of living for people so that they are seeing the cost of living go down, their wages rising. That, I think, is really, really key. And that's, my focus.
Again, I've been told in the last couple of days about the abuse that MPs get personally, also to their team as well. It's never nice to see these messages in any walk of life. How do you actually cope with those messages that are very deep and probably quite personal as well?
Well, you learn very quickly as an MP not to read social media comments, which sometimes you stick to and sometimes you don't.
It must be quite. You might want to read it sometimes, though, right? You might be a bit like, "Oh, what are they saying about me now?"
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you do, and it can be challenging because sometimes comments are unpleasant. And I'm not talking about people who raise legitimate questions or concerns. Absolutely, that's that's why we're in politics. That's the sort of discussion, debate that you want to have, and I want feedback from residents. But sometimes it does cross into the personal. Comments about appearance. When I started to talk about my ADHD, there were some pretty unpleasant comments about that. And sometimes that crosses into even more unpleasant behaviour. So threats to MPs or their offices, shouting and swearing and abuse at staff. And as we touched on earlier, I'm really conscious that when someone is getting in touch with me to be abusive, it's my staff that deal with the brunt of that as well, because they are there to book those surgery appointments, to deal with casework and so on. And so we have an acceptable behaviour policy, because I will not tolerate any abuse towards my staff ever, because no one should be going to work feeling unsafe or scared. In terms of how I cope with what's directed at me on social media and things like that, I try not to read it. When I do, I try to go and do something nice. Look, I'm always here to have discussion, debate, and listen to people. But I do think we need to be getting to a place where we're taking the heat out of some of these discussions. And that is a really important part of what we need to do, I think.
Well, thank you very much for joining me. I wanted to now ask you some more, away from political questions. So could we start with your personal life and your lifestyle? So these are quick fire. What is the first thing you do in the morning before work?
Brush my teeth, because when you have ADHD, you get very dry mouth with medication, and I just hate having a dry mouth and so on. So I like to brush my teeth first thing.
What's your go-to comfort meal after a long day in Parliament?
Oh gosh, I should say something healthy, but I love I do love having a pizza every now and then.
Is it a Domino's pizza?
It might be, yeah.
I thought you were going to say Chinese. Now, Chinese is one of my personal favourites. If you could live anywhere in the world for 1 year, where would it be?
That's a fantastic question, because I really haven't thought about it. I think I don't think I want to live anywhere else. I love, I've grown up here in Hertford, and I still live here today, and I love living here. Living in the community that I represent. I would like to maybe have the opportunity to travel in the future. That's not for right now, so I'd have to think about it.
Of course. Maybe like South America or Africa, somewhere like that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm open-minded. Of course.
What's your favourite band or artist?
Ozzy Osbourne. I'm a massive Ozzy Osbourne fan, massive Black Sabbath fan, which is something that happened in the last few years. I did try to get tickets to Back to the Beginning in Birmingham, where they did Ozzy's last concert. I didn't get those tickets, unfortunately. But yeah, that's my sort of go-to.
Are you a fan of reading? If so, what's your favourite book?
I like to try and read. It's sometimes a challenge with just in terms of when I get the train in the morning. I try to be doing work on the way in, and on the way home. Sometimes try and do work, but sometimes you just need to rest your eyes for a little bit. I like biographies. I like non-fiction. I am actually reading a biography about Ozzy Osbourne at the moment, which is a nice link to the last question. I'm not sure what my favourite book is, which is a terrible thing to say, isn't it? I think one thing I've been reading a little bit more about ADHD and about other people's experiences with ADHD, and I found reading some books around that has been quite helpful since I was diagnosed.
That's good. The last time we spoke, you said you weren't really much of a football fan, but you've been to Hertford Town. Yep. Can I now ask, do you now have a favourite football team?
Not a favourite one. I have been to one or two games, particularly in Hertford. I think two things. I've always wanted to be honest about not being a huge sports person, because there's nothing worse than the politician who pretends they support a team and then forgets which team it is, as other politicians have. But and also because I can't really pick one team in particular in my constituency, because we have several fantastic teams. But I think, when I get the opportunity to go and watch a game, I do enjoy it. There's such a great atmosphere at some of our local clubs. And last year we had John Staines had been volunteering at Hertford Town Football Club for, decades. And so I was keen to go down because they wanted to get over 1,000 people, I think it was, on that big day to support him and raised it in Parliament. So while I'm not a proper sports fan, as you might call it, I think it brings a lot to our community, and I feel very lucky when I get invited to go to things like that.
Before you became an MP, you were on several radio stations, including Unite Radio. If you weren't an MP, what job would you be doing?
Well, I get asked this a lot when I go to primary schools.
Sorry about that, Josh.
Not criticism, by the way. I get asked this question a lot. And I should say as well that primary schools tend to ask some of the best questions. But I've always said when I was growing up, I wanted to be a singer, but I can't sing.
Oh,
I think if I wasn't an MP, I would want to be a youth worker,
yeah.
because Russell was the youth worker that made such a huge difference to me. Really inspired me to go into politics and try to give back to the community that gave me so much. I think I want to be a youth worker and try and make a difference in that way.
And if you could have a dinner with three people, dead or alive, who would it be?
Um, oh, um, Ozzy Osbourne, um, Barbara Castle, and my granddad.
Okay. And the last question I have for you, Josh, is what is the most surprising thing about being an MP that people might not know?
Um, I think for me, one thing I say is there is something new to learn every day. People ask me when I speak to them, have you gotten used to it? And in a way, I have, but there is something new every day, and that's very exciting. Sometimes it can be a little bit daunting, and I'm very honest about I'm very conscious of the size of the responsibility you take on as an MP. Um, I think in Parliament, one of the things that surprised me the most was voting, because voting in Parliament is not as simple as pressing a button like it is in the United States, or putting a ballot in a box or whatever it may be. You have to walk through a lobby, so you either walk through the I lobby or the no lobby, and that takes up time because you have to walk through, go through, be counted. I think we had 8 votes on Monday. It took us about an hour and a half, if not nearly 2 hours. And it's one of the very old, very unique things about Parliament. It's very tradition based. But I think I'm not sure if it's something that surprises me, something I didn't expect, but something I feel very privileged about is as an MP, I get a window into people's lives, into the work that they do to make our community a better place. And I feel really privileged, really lucky that I get to have that window and support the work that people are doing, because that to me is the biggest privilege of this job. And I knew that a big part of it was, going to be engaging with, local residents, groups, charities, so on, and was keen to make sure that was a big part of it for me as our MP. But I think one of the nice surprises is just how much better I've gotten to know the community that is my home, and that I think I'm tremendously lucky to be able to engage with so many of those people.
Now, I know we're not quite London, but in Hertford Stortford, we've definitely got some well-known faces, and obviously you're in Parliament every day. You must get quite starstruck at times.
Um, I'm not sure if starstruck is quite the word.
Okay.
I think because I've been campaigning during the general election and been a member of the party for a while, people like I've met the Prime Minister and I've met some of the cabinet ministers. Obviously, have met them in more detail now and gotten to know some of them. Coming into Parliament, what maybe I was a little more not starstruck, but oh my goodness, that's whoever that is. I was going up an escalator, and Rishi Sunak, who at the time had become the leader of the opposition, was going down on the other side. And I just remember staring at him because I thought, well, I've never seen you in real life. Um, but I think one time I got genuinely starstruck was there were some campaign groups coming into Parliament to talk about, smartphones for children and young people. And I don't know if you've ever watched Peep Show.
No.
But there's a character on there called Dobby. Some people know who this is, some people won't, but it's a fantastic sitcom. And she came in to speak to MPs at a drop-in. And I grew up watching that with my friends. I mean, it's one of my favourite comedies. So I did get quite starstruck, and I sort of said, um, had a really good conversation about the campaign, but sort of had to say at the end, can I get a photo? Because my friends love this. So maybe that's the time that I got slightly starstruck. Yeah, it's one of those unique things. But going back to that point that we made earlier, the people I enjoy meeting most are people here in the community. That's what I think I enjoy most.
Well, Josh, thank you very much for joining me and answering all the questions to the best of your ability. And I really thank you for the work you're doing in the community and also in Parliament as well.
No, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, and we could do one every year. I'd
Yes,
love
sure.
to.